Okay, hi everybody. Hopefully you can hear me. And yeah, my name's Stephen Hamil. I'm Innovation Director here at MBS. In this presentation, we're going to look at some of the solutions that MBS offer to the challenges we've heard about today from all of the speakers. How standardization and digitization can lower risk and increase efficiencies. And just encourage people that either during the event or afterwards, when you're reflecting on what you've heard today, please keep that conversation going. We've got a events group set up on LinkedIn. We've got Twitter, and the hashtag is hashtag CLS2020. You can follow MBS at the MBS. So what I'd like to start is just reflecting on how far we've come. So MBS was formed in the 1970s, and 1990 we had our first digital product on Windows 3, so 386 computer specification manager. And those were the days where, like you can see on the screen, the offices still had drawing boards and typewriters. And we've come so far in 30 years as an industry to now sort of work in a world where you've got a sort of 3D model that's a sort of table of contents into the information, and people are working and collaborating together in the cloud. And one of the great things about these two videos that I've got on the screen is they both feature the same practice in the northeast of England, a practice called Faulkner Browns. And on the left-hand side there, they're sort of beta testing SpecMan in 1990 to work on a project to redevelop the Newcastle quayside. And then we can see 30 years later, the latest technology, cloud platform, connecting specifiers and manufacturers to produce like fantastic award-winning buildings, like the word there, South Shields Public Library in the northeast of England as well, where MBS is based. So the presentation today will first of all look at how successful standardization can help, give that transparency to produce safer buildings, standardization to help sort of with modular. We look at digital, really helping on the collaboration side. And then finally, we'll sort of finish on the topic that Minister Zahawi started with, was building back greener, sustainability, sustainable outcomes. So standardization hopefully feeds nicely from what Anne was presenting on. I'm just going to flash up some of the Twitter polls. Like, these aren't too scientific because I haven't got hundreds of people replying, but it just gives a little pulse of the questions we asked yesterday. And it's great to see that the most people agree that, even if it's just slightly agree, but the UK has shown real leadership in terms of BIM standards and process. And just want to point out two standards, 12006 Part 2, which is around classification of everything in the built environment, and 19650 series, which is around the whole sort of transition from the 1192 series, but in particular Part 2, which is around delivering information through the project timeline. And if you look at the national forward to 12006 Part 2, it talks about in the BS national forward, Unicast 2015 being the classification for the built environment. And that's also mentioned in the national annex of 19650 Part 2. And Unicast 2015 has been quite a journey. It was first published in 2015, but there's been something like 17, 18 improvements to it, working with some of the biggest companies, I was going to say in the UK industry, but also more and more now Australia as well. Not just buildings, you can see Highways England there, Transport for London, Environment Agency. And we've got an increasing number of software vendors that now included out the box inside their software, from the largest of companies like Viewpoint, Autodesk, Graphisoft, down to organizations that have sort of small software development teams. And Unicast 2015 allows you to have classification codes for everything in the built environment, from an entire complex, a railway complex, or in this case, a holiday village complex, to the different sort of locations that go around there, like the beach or a playground, all the way through to the entities, things like tunnels, bridges, buildings. And then inside those entities, there's classifications for the different space types, whether that's kitchens, plant rooms, dining areas, and then eventually the elements and for manufactured products, the systems and products that sort of define those spaces, from your walls and your floors and your security to your cladding, your linings, your floor coverings, your equipment. And we use MBS Unicast 2015 to underpin both of our major platforms. So on the left-hand side, you can see MBS Chorus, and all of the content you search for there, whether it's building services or structure or landscape or architecture, has that same construction language around the classification system. And then furthermore, once you go into those products, our technical authors research the relevant British standards, BSEN 771 here, and create the sort of technical characteristics that define those products. And that same language is used in MBS Source. So we jump across now to masonry wall units, filter by concrete blocks, same classification codes. And then what you can see there is you can filter your manufacturers to see the declaration of performance and any third-party certification, for example, BSI guide marks or BRE Red Book. And it's a mirror of the specification. And that's only possible by sitting there and starting with the classification, doing the research and getting that data structure right. And what that allows is the information to be captured at any point in time, but also for that information to get captured through the project timeline, that digital thread of specification decisions. What was originally specified? Were there any substitutions? Who said what? The transparency, following the codes in the 19650 user standards on things like suitability, on revisions, classified properly. And you can go to any of those work packages now and see who sent it out at what point in time. So the Dorset package here, sent out by my colleague Kate at a particular date, suitable for stage approval. And then inside those packages, all classified properly with that red, amber, green for what's changed, what's been removed, and what's then new. So good revisions control. Some people say golden thread. Good revisions controls another way of talking about it. And this is a poll that I didn't like to see the results of. After looking at the previous one, UK leaders, yeah, well done, pat ourselves on the back. But asking people, we asked this at an Autodesk session 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I'm not surprised by the results. But on the construction projects I work on, there is a digital process to record the changes in product specifications. I'm not sure if Dame Judith is still watching, but if she is, and she sees it rarely, 44% of the time, it's got to change. And in simple terms, this is how we see the digital thread. It's decisions getting made through the project timeline. From a client saying, I'd like doors from this supplier, to the designer saying, okay, this is the performance that's been designed. This is the certification that I want. To the contractor procuring a product, to the product being installed, to 2 or 3 years later, a new product coming in and being replaced, whether that's a boiler, whether it's a partition, whether it's a door set. At this point in time, where is the record of what was actually designed, what was asked for by the client? And that Twitter poll that we looked at showed us that on most of the time, it doesn't exist. You have to go back through old emails, through minute notes. Sometimes you haven't got a clue. Whereas if those decisions are captured, at every stage you can verify against the previous stage. So it gets a tick. This is a little interesting one. We've gone for a different manufacturer product, but it's followed the right process on product substitution. The performance has been checked. That product's deemed to comply, but it's been approved and it's actually over spec. The right product's been installed, might record that with a RFID or barcode or what have you. And then at any of these stages, you can always refuse it. I'm not happy that that door is going to be replaced because it hasn't got the right certification and the acoustic performance isn't strong enough. And that is your digital thread of information. And that's where the industry's got to get to. In terms of Unicast 2015, obviously it's not just MBS that use it. It's used by, I think, major government departments now. I just want to pick 3 quick examples. We'll hear more about this tomorrow from CIH, but Minister Zahawi picked up on it. Department for Education, and also leave buildings completely and have a look at Environment Agency. So a quick fire, sort of 20-second demos. CIH developing modular platforms, working with CIH, classify them at the sub-assembly level, but then go in and say what's in scope, what are the systems, what are the products that make up that standardized boiler layout or ceiling cassette or roof layout. Jumping across Department for Education, making sure those employers' requirements, that output spec for things like internal elements, has a brief that's in the right format, classified correctly with the client codes, with the guidance, so it can start to go through that thread. And then the final one here, working with Environment Agency, so that all of their assets have got the right classification. And then the Environment Agency going and defining what the sort of data definitions are for each one of these. Like, this has nothing to do with MBS high ground of a field, but the Environment Agency have defined what's important to them from an asset point of view. And they've got this fabulous map. This is where I live. This is where I'm presenting from, Durham. And you can go to the high ground of Durham Rugby Club and see that it's poor condition, and it was last checked in sort of 11th of July. And it's putting information at your fingertips through structuring it well. Digital collaboration. Yeah, Richard mentioned this. Since lockdown, people are using technology more and more. Cloud technologies slightly increased 85% of the time on that sort of Pulse Twitter poll. And the first side of collaboration I'd like to talk about is how at MBS we're collaborating with other technology vendors to make sure that we're not sort of working in silos. So I think most of those in the audience know we've had a plugin for Revit for years and years. But you can also see on the screen here plugins we've now got for ArchiCAD and Vectorworks. So you can develop the model and the specification in parallel, making sure they're coordinated, whether you're on a PC, huge multidisciplinary firm working on a PC on Revit, or whether you're maybe a smaller practice that's got a set of sort of Macs set up, and you top right there, it's ArchiCAD on a Mac, Vectorworks on a Mac. And it's that same experience for all of our customers, whether you're PC or whether you're Mac. You've got the MBS cloud specification system like inside the model, that 3D giving you that table of content into the really structured information, keeping your models light and getting real quality structured information linked to that, which is there in the cloud. And just to sort of zoom in a little bit, just show a demonstration of that in slightly more detail here. You've got the model on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, you've got the access to the project in MBS Chorus. The user Stephen logged on, and that particular model is linked to the architectural spec and the building services spec. And that means that when you click on any of those objects, so I think click on the door here, you're going to see on that on the right-hand side the specification for the door. With some technical design here, you can see quite a lot of information in there, pops up on the screen. You can actually edit the specification from the context of the design. And another part of digital collaboration is that the human element. So you could have Stephen, who's the designer, Kate here, who's the sort of master specifier in our office. And she's accessing Chorus through the web browser from maybe a different part of the world even. I know some of our users have got specifiers in South America and Europe, and they can work on the same project at the same time as the designer. And as Kate starts to specify, it's locked out for Stephen, using sort of webhook technology and sort of pushing that in. And as Kate clicks save in her browser, in Stephen's browser, those changes are reflected in a secure, audited way using modern technologies. So you've got great collaboration there between software companies, but also more importantly, between the project team to allow that digital collaborative culture to sort of take place. You can pop messages and notes and track those decisions through the project timeline. And I haven't mentioned them much today, but also our manufacturer partners, making sure that our manufacturers can get in front of the decision makers. So we've got over 1,000 manufacturers in MBS Source, which is the replacement for our IBA product selector, MBS Plus, National BIM Library. And we've got their content in there so it can be accessed digitally by the specifier. We know it's hard for our manufacturers at the moment and not being able to go to trade shows, not being able to go and deliver face-to-face CPD. So get the manufacturer content in front of the specifier. So in this case, when the specifier is specifying something like a paint system, when they click on the manufacturer for the product, they can see the technical information from the leading paint system providers in the UK. I had the Crown on there, Dulux on there. And furthermore, because it's a collaborative system, actually inviting the manufacturer into the spec so you can work collaboratively on it. Case study on our website, Frank and Ellis, working with the team at Dulux Trade, And this isn't exclusive development for Dulux. This is available for any manufacturer in the Cora system, in the Source system. So we've got Chris Dixon here from Franklin Ellis Architects, who's invited the team from Dulux in on the project, puts the brief in, and then the team from Dulux respond to that brief by writing the specification, combining products together to give him the system performance that he wants. Then Franklin Ellis can take Dulux off the project, go through it carefully, check it's robust and meets their requirements, and you've got great collaboration between the designer and the manufacturer. And that can be the same with subcontractor partners, cost consultants, etc. And then finally, sustainable outcomes. This is how we started the day. First opening comments from Minister Zahawi's around creating a greener future. Again, I'm going to start with a horrible Twitter poll. I was hoping for better results than this. So on construction projects I work on, I'd love to know about this in the chat. I'm going to check every single message that's come in the chat afterwards. Is it that side? There are metrics to record the sustainable outcome targets. Nearly 60% rarely. So starting negative, but let's see what we can do. In terms of sustainable outcomes, I can't speak highly enough of some of the RIBA initiatives here. And what they did was they looked at the UN Sustainable Development Goals and identified a collection of 8 that were applicable to the built environment. So net zero embodied carbon, net zero embodied, as well as operational, water, connectivity, sustainable land use, health and well-being, communities, and life cycle cost. And in the new RIBA Plan of Work 2020, they said at the end of every stage, strategy briefing through the design stages, you should have metrics against each one of these. Talk with your clients, what you're trying to achieve, and then you can judge the project better than just talking about it around the meeting table and sending emails back and forward. These are the 8 things that you should be thinking about. What are we doing at MBS? Well, the first thing we'll stay with our manufacturer customers is with the release of MBS Source and the soon-to-be released manufacturer platform is asking our manufacturers to put their sustainability credentials in consistently, whether that's against the specification properties or against more generic information, sort of environmental passport on things like hazardous material, where your products are manufactured, embodied carbon, recyclability, etc. So each manufacturer can go in and do this once, so the whole industry can benefit from it. Each one of our architectural engineering customers doesn't have to have individual conversations with 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 manufacturers. It can be there in one place. And then in terms of specification, make sure you get all of these things written down, specified in the contractual document set. As May Winfield said earlier on, don't just ask for a project to be sustainable. Don't just ask for it to be a BIM project, but get it documented in the contract documentation. So a little 90-second sequence here, which is going to be a bit rapid fire, but just looking at where you can specify sustainable outcomes in using MBS templates, specification content. So things like net zero carbon for operation, things like the U values, things like using CHP, trying to get down to net zero in terms of embodied carbon, like sustainable timber, looking at embodied carbon declarations and offsets. If we jump across now and look at sustainable use of water, things like SUDS and RAS certification and grey water reclamation. If we look at, I think, connectivity was the fourth one, and the transport. So encouraging cycling to work schemes, electric vehicle charging points. Moving across to biodiversity, things like bat boxes, bird boxes, green roofs. They can all be specified in MBS living walls. Moving on now, looking at health and well-being, making sure you really got things like nailed down in terms of inclusive design, in terms of daylighting, getting that performance right early on, and then moving all the way through to thinking of that entire life cycle. Soft landing, something that's so important. If you're specifying a heating system, specify the soft landing as well. What testing needs to be done, what operation, what demonstrations, what the servicing that gets planned. And then finally, the community aspect, things like social responsibility, registration schemes. And if you can think of those 8 things and make sure you document them all, we're going to make a built environment with a better, sort of greener future. So some good examples there, hopefully. So in summary, We're coming to the end of the morning session, coming into the final Q&A, but digital is changing everything. In construction, as you were behind other industries, just people who have seen this slide before, but you look at all of these like huge brands now that are just completely changing other sectors, like Amazon, Skype, Uber, just complete revolution. And I think the same thing's happening in construction now. A number of companies really pushing the digital message, and we're trying to do our bit at MBS there as that sort of a vehicle that's connecting the decision makers on projects with the construction manufacturers through really standardizing that construction data. So to discover more, we've got MBS team all here today, so pop messages in the chat if you want to know more, and we'll follow them up. Go to the mbs.com, chorus and source, and our email address as well is, you want to scribble it down, info@thembs.com, and we can do lunchtime seminars, get your colleagues together in a meeting room and have a bit of a workshop and talk specification, talk well-structured manufacturer product information. So we're here to support the industry and sort of help drive that digital agenda. Remember, #CLS 2020. And thanks very much.